directed that the amendment be based on the actual bid estimates, and those results aren't available yet. So are there any corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, the minutes circulated of the March 19th, 2024 Finance Committee meeting are accepted as circulated. Next item is the audit of the bills to be paid. Bill, do you have any updates for us?
I do. I have one addition tonight that is for the University of Wisconsin Police Department. The amount is $5,198.13, and that is for their portion of a safety pass-through grant from the state of Wisconsin.
Safety pass through. Okay. All right. Can I get a motion?
This is Jackson. I'll make the motion.
Thank you.
Thorman will second.
Thank you. And let the minutes reflect that Alder Wokus has joined us. Welcome, Alder Wokus. All right. Any questions or comments about the bills to be paid? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor of approving the audit of the bills to be paid with the addition of $5,198.13 for the UW Police Department for their share of the safety pass-through grant, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Moving on to resolutions. We have one. Resolution 2024-18, approving the assignment of 2023 general fund year-end fund balances, and this comes to us from staff. Bill, do you want to give us an overview?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'm going to bring up the first page of the memo that's in the packet and go through an overview here and of the summary sheet. So to start with, we have some very good financial news for the city as we have completed our audit and have our final 2023 year-end numbers. We ended the year with a very strong surplus, the largest that I have seen during my time with the city, of a little over $2.1 million in the general fund. That is a combination of several factors, a couple of large items, and then several smaller items that contribute to that total. And I've listed the major items under the revenues and expenditures in the memo, and just highlight a couple of the key items. The first and largest source of that surplus is the significant increase in investment income. That is $752,000 above the budget of $500,000 that was included for general fund interest income. And for those that were on the Finance Committee at the time, a year ago when we were looking at the 2022 year-end numbers, we actually booked a reduction or a negative investment income because of the requirement to adjust investments to market value. And when there was the large increase in interest rates that started in 2022 and continued into 2023, even though we did not sell and have realized losses, we needed to book that adjustment to market value. During 2023, we benefited both from, as interest rates rose and then were stabilized at a higher level in 2023, we gained the additional interest income from that higher level of interest rates, as well as our investments were reaching maturity and we were able to have those mature and reinvest. That negative reduction for market value significantly went down. So the combination of those two factors resulted in a very high increase in interest income, and that's the largest single source contributing to the surplus. The next largest area, unfortunately, was vacancies, and I think we're all aware of the issues we had, particularly within the police department, also within other city departments during a large portion of 2023. And just looking at the police department alone with wages and benefits, that was about $360,000 that was under budget due to those vacancies. The council has already taken action to allocate a large portion of that money towards the retention program that was approved in the end of 2023. And part of the recommendations include assigning the funds to continue that program through the remainder of its course during 2024. Other areas where there were savings compared to the budget was public safety capital reserve funds for fire and EMS. We budget at a flat amount each year, and as those funds are if they are not utilized in that year, they add to the balance, building up those capital reserves. We also had about $100,000 in contingency that was unspent in 2023, and various other items across the departments and revenues that added up to that total. I'm going to go over to the second page of the memo where it talks about the recommendations for these balances. And there's several items that are included in this resolution. This is looking at the city's general fund. And within that general fund, we have three categories of our fund balance or of our reserves. The first and smallest category is what's called non-spendable fund balance. And that is money that is, or funds that are not immediately available to be spent. So these are things like prepaid items that we book as an asset, but it's not cash that we can spend, or receivables that we have on the books, but they are not considered current receivables, so they're not immediately available to be spent. There was a $61,000 decrease in that non-spendable category. The next and largest area for the recommendations, the largest number of recommendations, is what is referred to as assigned fund balance. And this is fund balance that is not legally restricted for these purposes, but it's assigned by the city for these purposes, or essentially earmarked for these items. Those earmarks can be changed by future action of the council, but it's an indication that we're trying to put money aside for specific purposes with these recommendations. And then the final category of fund balance is unassigned fund balance. That is our essentially our long-term reserve, our rainy day fund. Those are the funds that are available if we would have an emergency and we needed to tap into them, or to provide for cash flow or other unanticipated needs of the city. There are several recommendations identified for the assigned fund balances. Included in the memo is a narrative discussion of each of those. And if you go forward to page 11 in the packet, we tried to put together a summary sheet that highlights all of these items. Several of the assigned fund balances, the first few that are on here, are ongoing balances that the city has maintained. The first is for compensated absences. This is money that the city has been setting aside to pay for costs when an employee leaves employment with the city and is eligible for a payout of their vacation leave, as well as potentially their sick leave, depending on their tenure and if they're retiring with the city. We have utilized about 171,000 of that during 2023 to make payments when employees left. The recommendation is to add 395,000 to that fund. That would bring us up to a total of about 2.6 million, and that represents about 80% funding of our estimated liability for those future payments. And based on our average history of payments over the last several years, that would fund about 10 years worth of payments based on that average. So it puts us in a really good place to have that money set aside to be able to accommodate those payments. The next two items are our public safety reserves for fire capital equipment and EMS capital equipment replacement. Those were both items that are budgeted, and the portion that was not spent out of that budgeted amount would be adding to those balances. That would result in fire at just under 1.4 million and the EMS ambulance replacement at 460,000. The next couple of items, carryovers, these are for items that there was either approval in the budget in 2023 but unspent, or that personnel retention and reserve for public safety employees. This would allocate funds for that program. So with the police retention program, that was to be payable quarterly. The first payments were made in third or fourth quarter of 2023. We have the additional payments extending through 2024. So by allocating this money at the end of the year, we have that pool of money to continue making those payments in 2024. The pruning item, that's something that was budgeted in the forestry budget, but was unspent in 2023 due to some of the staffing turnovers. The recommendation and the request from staff is that that be carried over and combined with the budget allocation for 2024, and they would do a larger pruning block in 2024 with those 2 budget years worth of funds. The next several items that are included here are staff recommendations, looking at this opportunity that we have with these one-time funds to be able to fund some non-recurring expenditures rather than having to look at trying to fit those into our operating budget in the future or potentially borrow for items. The first is to increase our revaluation fund. Even though the city had just gone through a revaluation in 2022, because of the rapid changes in the market, we're estimating that we're already at an 80% assessment ratio. The state requires that you be within 10% of market value at least once in a 4-year period. We are in compliance with that currently, but given that we've seen about 10% increases in market values the last couple of years. We are recommending that we put some funds aside to be able to be in a position to consider a revaluation either in 2025 or 2026. And this is based on our current contract, which builds in cost for revaluation services, and it would include an exterior physical inspection because it's been, by my understanding, about 10 years since the city has done that. So to make sure that we have current and accurate records, this price that's negotiated with our contract would include having the assessment team go out and physically visit each property, not necessarily inside inspections, but at least physically verify the condition and square footage and conditions of the properties within the city. It would be a future discussion of when to have the revaluation and the timing and the communication, but this at least would assign the funds so we'd have them available when we're ready to do that. The EMS services study, this would fund the item that the council had approved earlier this year to proceed with the shared services study with Waunakee Area EMS and the Wisconsin Policy Forum. Our contribution towards that study is $10,000. The next item for the Civic Campus would be to provide a pool of funds as a placeholder for potential additional work to try to finalize the Civic Campus plan, which is a priority in the strategic plan. Staff has been working with consultants and working to get the advisory or the community campus planning committee ready to meet again. But there is thought that to revisit the space needs studies for items that were done pre-pandemic and to look at the physical conditions of the current buildings, what would be required for HVAC and potential remodeling costs, there will be additional costs, and this would provide a pool of funding to help cover that when we're ready to move forward. There's a proposed transfer of $100,000 to the transit fund. We had transferred $120,000 at the end of 2023. There was some discussion during the budget process that if there are additional funds identified, that we may want to look at increasing that transfer to help us to absorb those additional costs from the agreement that we have with Madison Metro. That $120,000 that we transferred, we're projecting to use over 3 years, and this would give us some additional funding to help with future year budgets. And then finally, the last item, the copier/technology fund. This would be a pool of funds that would be available to potentially fund new technology purchases where it can be demonstrated that there would be an efficiency or an operating budget savings to the city, to provide a pool of funds to do that without having to look at borrowing. One immediate example that we're looking at is trying to transition more of the city's copiers from a lease arrangement to a purchase. If we can purchase at advantageous pricing under state contract, reduce our costs compared to leasing, and also help free up space in our operating budgets, which are constrained by levy limits. The other potential source of this funds would be to use as kind of a sinking fund for putting money aside for other future capital or technology improvements. One specific item that we had talked about during the budget process was looking to the future of an integrated ERP system that could potentially combine finance, payroll, human resources into an integrated platform. There would need to be additional discussion and evaluation as part of the budget process, but this would be a potential opportunity to start putting money aside to make it easier if and when we're ready to make that kind of movement. With all of those recommendations, that would leave a balance of $611,000. That would be the increased unassigned fund balance. That would bring that up to about $7.5 million. And looking at the graph on the bottom portion of the page, that represents about 30% of the next year's budgeted expenditures. That's well within our target range and toward the end of our target range and consistent with where we've been over the last few years. So I know I went through a lot of information. There's more in the packet. I'd be happy to answer any questions or can be open up for discussion.
Great. Does anybody have questions for Bill? Alder Jackson? No, thank you for
No.
that very thorough summary, Bill. I see that when the financial statements are ready, the city's auditors will attend one of our meetings to present. Do you have any idea what timeframe that is?
That will likely be the first meeting in June. We will be receiving the draft statements in May. Then we need to finalize other portions of our comprehensive annual comprehensive financial report. And then they would be coming in to present the final version and looking for adoption or acceptance of that in June.
Okay. I really like the idea of the revaluation in 25 or 26. Does the state have, the state requires 10%, you said?
Yeah, if you fall outside of that 10%, then you have 4 years to do a revaluation to get back into compliance.
Okay. And I would hope that our communications manager can help us get good information out to our residents so they don't assume their property taxes are going up the same amount as the valuation.
Right,
Yep.
correct.
Yeah. The 80% of compensated absences, is there a state requirement for how much we're supposed to have available for that?
No, there is not a state requirement. That's just something that internally, rather than trying to fund that in each year's budget, we've tried to build up this fund over time.
Okay, and then looking at the unassigned fund balance, if we can scroll down and see that whole table. The policy hasn't been updated since 2017, and you mentioned to me earlier, I just want to let my colleagues know that if you look at this band, we are always well above the lower level. So it may be time to change where that band is and bump it up since we're doing a lot better than the 2 months. That is the lower limit. And then I had one question, and this is probably for Sean. On, I think it was page 11 of the packet, there was 7,000 budgeted for special assessments for street improvements and only $250 taken in. And I'm wondering if that may be because of Parmenter being delayed. And if you don't know, just shake your head and we'll come back to, I can ask you offline.
It would be better if I could look it up.
Thank you. All right, fair enough. Sean will look that up. Okay. Well, this is great news, Bill. Can I get a motion to approve the resolution?
Lorman will make that motion.
Thank you.
This is Jackson. I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve Resolution 2024-18, approving the assignment of 2023 General Fund year-end fund balances. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any?
Aye.
All right, the ayes have it. Moving on to agreements and contracts, we have 3. First one is Park and Ride Bicycle Trail Grant Agreement, and this comes to us from the PRFC. Can I get a motion to approve the agreement?
This is Jackson. I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you.
Focus a second.
Thank you. Discussion. It seems like this is the agreement that's going to allow us to get our $127,009. Yes, okay. And the $50,000 donation was credited to both the city and the county, not just the city?
The $50,000 was credited.
I don't think that's, all right.
The $50,000 was credited just to the city for the project.
Okay. But if the total project cost was $304,000, that means half of it, which is what the county is funding, should be close to $150,000, correct?
And the way that they set up the, or the way that they had noted that they would, they took the total project cost minus that 50,000 from Corp. And then that was the total amount that they divided by 50,000 or by 50%.
Okay.
And that's how they came up with the amount that they would be willing within this grant. But I get the.
Yeah, so I think that the 50,000 is coming to the city, but the county is taking that into consideration and funding
When they're giving
50% of
us-
the
okay.
remainder.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Any further questions for Kylie or discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor of approving the Park and Ride Bicycle Trail Grant Agreement signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Moving on to our second agreement, it's the agreement with Strand Associates for design engineering services for Cayuga Connector Path. This comes to us from the PED Bike and Transit Committee. Can I get a motion to approve?
Norman will make that motion.
Thank you.
Actually, one issue with this, and Sean is aware that there's, in our form, there is, in the indemnification provision, there's one word that needs to be stricken because of some recent legislation regarding contracts with certain service providers like engineers. We can no longer ask them to defend us in an indemnification clause. I think that adjustment has been made to our form, but I still see it in this particular
Is that on
draft.
the-
The rest of the indemnification clause is fine.
Can we
just-
see the
What
part
page is
that
that
needs
on
to
the
be
agreement?
changed? Yeah.
Yeah, if you look on page 39,
Okay, I'm looking at it.
or I'm sorry, 37. Sorry, the page numbers are overlapping. It's page 7 of 12 of that particular document.
Okay, page 7 of the
And
document.
Roman numeral 6A, the consultant agrees to indemnify. We just need to delete defend and that additional comma. The rest is fine.
Okay, so Alder Lorman did not get a second. Alder Wilkes, would you like to make a motion to approve this with the deletion of the word defend?
So it's,
I will move that we approve the agreement with the deletion of the word in which section? Section
Seven.
6A?
Yes.
Excuse me, the deletion of the word defend, I believe.
Okay, and Alder
Lorman
Lorman?
will second that.
Thank you. All right, any discussion? Hearing and seeing none, I have a question. And that is, at what point, and maybe Mark can answer this, and I apologize, it wasn't, the Ped Bike and Transit Committee was one of the 2 meetings I missed in my term, and it was because of a candidates forum. At what point do we need to secure permission from the fire district to do this?
Happy to report.
It's okay. You're being a good steward of our batteries.
I'm happy to report that Strand has already been working with them in the course of preparing their proposal, so they are well aware of the project.
Okay, that's great. And will there need to be any neighborhood consultation?
There's one property owner aside from the fire district that will be affected, and I'm trying to reach out to them right now this week.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, otherwise, it's not going to impact any private property.
Great. Okay, any further questions or discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the agreement with Strand Associates for design engineering services for Cayuga Connector Path with the deletion of the word defend in section 6A, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Is Alder Jackson approaching council chambers? Okay, all right, I see him out there. Okay. Our last agreement is the Specialized Aviation Service Operations, or SASO, agreement with Capital Flight LLC. You recall this actually didn't get reviewed by council on the 19th because the Finance Committee referred it to the Airport Commission. I'm going to be looking for a motion. First, I want to thank the members of the Airport Commission for trying to draft new language. I also want to thank Matt and Brian for making the changes we agreed to at our meeting in October and for restoring the language that we hadn't voted to remove. That's the provisions in section 1 regarding option to renew. I'm assuming the operator would wish to have an option to renew, and so that language has been restored. It wasn't in our March 19th version. So I'm looking for a motion.
Well, the motion I would simply make is to strike the rental clause from the current SASO agreement and there, thank you, Brian. Just strike the clause under number 2A, operator, for the first 5 years of this agreement, rental occupancy charge shall be subject for discussion between Middleton and the operator at the conclusion of 5 years. So it's either we strike that because we tried to come up with a logical reason as to why that's there, finding history. We really struggled with it for quite some time. I think Brian can articulate quite well the nature of our discussion. And Matt was there, plus another attorney who's a member of the Airport Commission, and other commission members simply said they have a fundamental concern when there's just kind of this open-ended statement in the middle of a 15-year agreement, where the logic was that the reason it's worded the way it is now was because it was a 5-year agreement. So you have a 5-year agreement, and at the end of 5 years, there could be this discussion of rental occupancy. And that's where we left it. Either strike it or consider aligning it to 15 years.
So going back to your motion at the beginning.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
So the motion is,
I just wanted to know which
my
one.
motion is to strike the language,
Okay.
to strike that whole section from the current SASO agreement, and we're done.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to strike the.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's
Yeah,
okay.
they're-
To strike the, the redlined language that's showing. Do we have a second for that?
So did Alder
This
Jackson
is Jackson. I'll second.
get that? Okay.
Okay, we have a motion and we have a second to strike the language. Discussion. Alder Rokas.
Can you explain to me a little bit more about the history of why it was there and comparing it? I noticed in the memo that the discussion at the airport that this was not in any other SASO agreement that you guys
Could find.
could find.
Could find.
So why was it there in ours to begin with?
We don't know.
Mike, yeah, I wasn't directly involved in all the details of this, and I remember talking with Larry, and he couldn't remember specifically. A lot of this language comes from, I think, a form SASO agreement that the Bureau of Aeronautics has. Various SASO agreements oftentimes combine the SASO terms along with the lease of the space. Not necessarily universal, but that's the case. And so actually I had the opportunity today to talk with Iowa County's guy. They are on an entirely different thing, and just happened to overhear that he also oversaw the airport. And so they've got a few different ones where, one that maybe is a little more straightforward is that they basically have a little additional rental charge, like it's 11 cents a square foot or something for those who are running commercial operations out of their spot. He didn't know where that had come from. He wasn't around when that got implemented. And a couple others are a little bit different. But I guess the point of all that is that it's not unusual for these to all be combined in one rental agreement. And then, some do have a kicker for either increased rent or some other charges. Like, for instance, I've seen one that has a charge for based upon percentage of revenue. Now, I think that's it's not uncommon like retail leases, but it certainly wasn't the common thing that I've seen. So here, I think at the time, because this was our only provider of services of this kind, I think on some level it must have been discussed, but decided that, well, listen, we've got nobody else here providing these kind of services as a benefit, but just threw that language in as just sort of a marker just to remember, hey, we did kind of talk about this and this may come up again. I mean, it really has no legal significance, because as Alder Lorman pointed out, under the existing agreement, that possibility does not come up until the end of the initial term. So sometimes you put language in there just as a help parties remember where they left off the last discussion. And I think that that's where that was. So that's the best I can do is to piece together, that, the topic must have come up, but at the time there was, for whatever reasons, not any consensus on whether there should be any additional charges, and just wanted to put that in there as sort of a placeholder that we may bring it up again. Now, I think that's one of the things I don't know that we're really how much better of a position we are to talk about it in terms of at least what kind of amount, if any, additional charges should be. Certainly, in the places where I've seen some additional charges under most circumstances, there are other providers, which suggests there's a different dynamic at the airport. How much that plays into here, I don't really know. Ultimately, it's a decision of, what is this particular operation bringing to the airport? What's it going to do? I mean, I don't know. Nobody is, to my knowledge, threatened to go away or anything like that. But the request for the 15 years was to allow a little more length of time in order to make some additional investments to grow the business and whatever ancillary benefits that brings to our airport to have. But we balance off, obviously, the longer we extend the term without building in some kind of lease. I mean, I don't know we're out anything per se unless certain practices become maybe more of an impact to the airport where some compensation is necessary. There's some risk in that, but also, I've seen a lot of these agreements are also much longer than 15 years too. But so unfortunately, there's not a real good formula for us to follow, but those are all the various considerations that kind of go into these as far as I've been able to
Thanks.
determine.
Thanks for explaining that, Matt, and for your research on this. Alder Wilkes, does that?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the answer. I still don't like not charging anything. I mean, I think it's a pretty large piece of city property that this business is operating on, and I think that there should be some compensation, but.
So I see that almost as a separate discussion because with the current agreement that's been renewed every 5 years, there's never been any compensation. They lease the property. And I did have a meeting, Brian and I, with Bill to just kind of a high level overview of that. And the city does their best to keep lease agreements and the rate they charge for that competitive or to keep up with changes. I mean, you could probably shed some light on that, but it is monitored by the city. We're not a charity. And I don't know, Bill, if you have anything you could just fill in on the big picture of leasing, and that might help address that.
Yeah,
Because it's two separate pieces, the SASO versus the lease.
Yeah, I was not involved in the initial negotiation of the hangar leases. I was involved the last time they came up for renewal. At that time, we had looked at the provisions in there that allow for escalation based on the CPI over a 5-year period. So we've calculated and applied that and intend to continue doing that going forward.
So it's two separate things. The lease is there. This is not tied to the lease. That this really isn't tied to any financial component. I guess, the way I interpreted it, this is like an expectation. If you're going to have a business there, these are the certain things we expect out of you and how we expect you to behave as a business. So if you're going to be a business, you're going to provide a core level of services. And that's what's outlined here. And that's why we kept struggling with this financial piece. The money side is on the lease side. This is an expectation side. And like we said, when we looked at other airports and their operations, some of the leases were had the business tied into it with a lot of different clauses for escalation and clauses in there for, various fee structures based on the nature of their business. So, if you're this kind of business and you do this, you are going to be expected to pay a certain fee structure because of maybe the impact of your business, things like that. And I wish it was consistent. I wish there was, kind of like a template to go, oh, for a general aviation airport of the category of Middleton, which is called a large general aviation airport, but we're not a reliever airport. And that gets into a whole nother category. So these other airports we looked at that were large general aviation airports, they were also reliever facilities. So that means they had runways that were up to 6,000 feet in length. They actually got larger aircraft there, jets and things like that, that could actually literally relieve an airport like Truex, for example. And so those businesses there were catering more to that type of aviation activity. So, what really defines the operation of the Middleton Airport is that length of that runway. So it's 4,000 feet. So aircraft up to a certain size can take off and land. So aircraft up to that size are going to be service supported and simply operate at the airport. So it's kind of like everything kind of falls in line with that. And, at Capital Flight, you look at their business, that's what they are. It's small general aviation aircraft, and that's what they're engaged in the sale and service of, and that's what they're engaged in the flight training operation of. And that's what they do. I mean, it's kind of pretty straightforward.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And for explaining the difference between the core level of services and the finances. Matt, Alderwocus, did you have anything else at this time? Matt, if we were to sign an agreement that built in a conversation, a discussion about occupancy charges at the end of 15 years, would we have the ability to negotiate a commercial land lease for the renewal of the land lease this year? Because one of the things that came up on the airport commission meetings was the fact that this operator doesn't pay any kind of commercial, like the land lease Capital Flight has is the same rate as the private land leases. I think it was Commissioner Young, Jack Young, said to operate your business and have the advantages that they have in that location just feels like a huge advantage for them. To me, it should be something that initiates almost immediately. Didn't realize there wasn't a charge for them conducting their business on the field. And he said, it shouldn't be zero, or it should be not zero, but it's not market-based rents either. It should be somewhere in between. So would we, if we were to sign this agreement and deal with the core services piece here, could we, during the course of this year, because I know the leases need to be renegotiated for 2025, could we still pursue a commercial land lease instead of a private one for commercial?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think there's a mechanism by which we can institute that sort of policy, whether we do it directly through the existing hangar land leases. I'm not sure where all their terms line up and things like that. We might have to go about it a different way than doing it through the hangar leases for practical reasons, but I believe that there is a way to implement that sort of policy.
Okay, because
one way or the other.
Right, and it would have to be consistent for all commercial entities at the airport under our
Yes. Yeah,
assurances.
right, yeah, discriminating.
Right. I'm willing to go with 15 and 15 if we can either have a second motion or amend the motion to add direction to the staff to pursue or to prepare for the possibility of a commercial land lease.
Can we do that as finance? I guess we can as finance.
My only concern is, we have two separate topics here. One is this, the SASO, the other is
The finance.
the future of land are we going to have different leases for businesses at the airport versus just, non-business operators. So we have two things here. How do we're trying to combine that into this SASO agreement?
Well,
No.
I don't think any action can be really taken on that second part tonight. I think that's
Right.
just the
Oh,
understanding.
the
I think
future-
tonight, the motion is rather than striking, there seems to be voice of support to have, just the issue of the occupancy charges, to coincide with the, term of the lease.
Right. Right.
Or,
What,
term of the SASO.
SASO agreement. Right. What I'm looking for, because I agree with Alder Wilkes, I think 15 years, I was comfortable, and I even said, I'm only comfortable tripling the period of the term, if we can build in this possibility that at some future date, and we had picked 5 years, we could have a discussion. We weren't saying we will charge fees. We certainly weren't saying they would be arbitrary fees, as the operator indicated at the airport commission meeting. It certainly isn't blackmail on our part that, according to the operator, that's what we're doing, is blackmailing him. A comment which, by the way, is not only completely false and insulting, but it degrades the work that we do here as a finance committee and as a council. And I don't appreciate accusations like that being thrown about. Anyway, what I'm getting to is if we agree to this 15 and 15, there has to be something coming out of it that appeases us and our concerns about the city's financial interest. Does that make sense? And so having a direction to look at the possibility of establishing commercial land leases for commercial entities during this year's lease renewal, that is something that I would be in favor of voting.
Okay, so yeah, if you're talking about doing that and changing that under the lease structure, I mean, I think we would probably want to add some additional language here, like that would, because right now the language says that we aren't going to charge an occupancy charge, and won't for 15 years. I might want to include some language in there, unless the part of a general policy applicable to all.
Yeah.
I guess
It would have to be for all commercial operations. And Alder Wilkes, I'm sorry, I saw your hand was raised.
I was just going to say, I think what you're suggesting is to reinstate that second sentence that's been struck.
And
Rental
yeah, with,
occupancy charges shall be subject for discussion between Middleton and all operators at the airport, or all
right. So I guess
all
what we're,
tenants at the airport.
so we're recommending is in number 2A, simply changing that to, for the first 15 years of this agreement, rental occupancy charges, and I'd like to change shall to may be subject to discussion between Middleton and the operator at the conclusion of the first 15 years of this agreement.
Or at the conclusion of the agreement, or at the conclusion, because the agreement is for 15 years.
Yeah, but does
So,
the word
for the
first make
terms-
sense there in the last sentence? No, you just strike the word first, right? At the conclusion of the 15-year of this agreement. And then as far as future discussions go, I mean, I just don't want us to get outside of our agenda here, but
Yeah.
as far as the leases go, let's just call it private hangar versus commercial hangar operation. I would defer that back to the city, to come up with something to review and make an advisement, back to finance for future timeframe. If that,
Well, my concern though, leaving, I mean, if there is a sense that this charge would actually be imposed sometime before the end of this 15 years, I would be concerned that this language could be read as precluding us from, for instance, doing something with the hangar agreements when
Right.
we have said we're not going to have any additional charges.
What if we strike paragraph A in its entirety? would not specifying anything about occupancy charges mean that we could not pursue a commercial lease in the future?
See, the thing is, you could have so for example, you can have the FBO operation at the airport, right? And it would not be operated under the SASO agreement. It would be its own agreement. But that FBO is leasing the same land.
Right, so it would have to be consistent.
So
No.
the FBO would be subject to
The
a
same.
different agreement than this. So again, we have an FBO agreement that outlines how an FBO has to behave. But we have a separate land lease agreement. And just disconnected from these types of agreements. Because ideally, we would have additional SASOs out at the airport.
Right.
Bringing in other types of service. And larger airports have multiple FBOs.
Right.
So,
Right.
I guess what I'm saying is if we want to discuss the private land lease versus commercial land lease, fine, but just under a whole separate thing for the future and just have these agreements be what they are. I think as Alder Hanaro pointed out, well, okay, we don't want to have language in this that limits the city from engaging in other discussions with businesses at the airport, right? So we don't want to box the city into a corner. So fine, then strike that paragraph completely.
Matt, do you see a problem striking that paragraph? I would leave in the failure to pay charges because there might be, something embedded in this.
It would remedy the issue that
Right,
I'm concerned about, yes.
okay,
I think charges are just that.
right, if there's,
If they impact the property, damage, physical damage, are the city's having to engage in additional services?
Mhm.
And we send them a bill for, I don't know, knocking a fence down or something. Whatever. I get it.
okay, then,
Madam Chair, and just whomever makes that motion, I'd also suggest that you make it contingent upon city attorney review and approval.
okay, Alder Bogus, would you like to, does this motion interest you?
Sure. I will move that we strike paragraph A from section 2 of the SASO agreement,
I'll second that.
subject to certain city attorney review and approval.
I will second that. Further discussion, Matt, I don't know if Bill brought this up to you earlier.
Yeah.
There are two references to leased premises. One is 4C on page 46 and one is 14D on page 51. And the section cited 1A doesn't actually describe leased premises. So I don't know how to handle it. Maybe we could change it to Exhibit B and add an Exhibit B that.
Well, what I think that's intended is what I have in my notes to address that is simply try and just refer to the premises it leases under its hangar land lease, because that's referenced. The existence of that is referenced in the whereas clauses. And it's basically whatever premises they rent.
Okay.
Is what that's intended to.
Okay, and then also Bill and I discussed on page 48, section 8A, insurance. It refers to a liability limit established by Middleton's staff, and everywhere else we just referred to Middleton.
Yeah.
And then it goes on to say in consultation with its liability insurance carrier and Middleton's risk manager. And Bill and I talked about just changing it to say established by the city of Middleton, period.
Period. Yeah, I agree.
So
with that.
that will be one of the city attorney review and approval changes.
Yes.
Alders, you've heard the
Mhm.
recommended changes? Okay. Okay, so we have a motion. We have a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving the motion to approve all those in favor of the motion to approve the Specialized Aviation Service Operations Agreement with Capital Flight LLC, striking paragraph 2A and pending city attorney review and approval, signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. We have one more item of business, and Bill, I guess we'll have to move the first quarter update. Okay. We have a bid for, let's see, award a bid to Farner Asphalt Sealers LLC in the amount of $189,162 for 2024 street surface treatments. This comes to us from Public Works.
I will move approval on behalf of Public Works.
And
Norman will second that.
thank you.
Can you,
Discussion.
yeah, can you remind me really quick, Sean, did we discuss at Public Works to approve it in this amount, but also to not exceed
Well, this is the
the actual bid for chip and seal, right?
value of the bid. So these are the prices submitted for the scope of work provided. But we often get direction from the council to maximize use by varying quantities, in effect, doing a little extra work on other streets up to the $250,000 in the budget.
That's been allocated. So do we need the motion to reflect that, or that's just procedure?
Let's take two motions.
Okay.
We can vote on the one that you've
Okay.
made first, and then we'll get a second motion to direct staff to work on preparing a change order to the agreement to use up to the entire $250,000 budgeted.
Got it.
That could be the second. Okay, any questions, comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of the first motion, which is to award bid to Farner Asphalt Sealers LLC in the amount of $189,162 for 2024 street surface treatments, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. May I have a second motion to direct the staff to work on preparing a change order to the agreement to use up to the entire $250,000 budgeted for surface treatments in '24?
So moved.
Thank you.
Seconded.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. Our last item is the update on first quarter 2024 investment reports. Without objection, I will move that we defer that to next time, which means we have reached the end of our agenda. And before we do adjourn, I just want to thank Alder Wokus for serving on the Finance Committee with us. It has really been a pleasure to work with you this past year on finance. You've contributed a lot.
Sure.
So thank you. We are adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you, Alder Wilkes.
I realized we were still meeting.